大家好，我是 Jenny， 欢迎来到沉思者 J。 今天我要带你们认识一个人，他是一位探险家，他是一位外科医师，他是一位文化人类学者，而且他靠着自己的双脚和双手，走完了53000公里的旅程，用了整整10年。他的名字叫做关野吉晴。他问了一个问题，一个听起来很简单的问题，但是没有人真的用身体去回答过它。我们人类究竟从哪里来的？这不是哲学问题，也不是考古问题，他把它变成了一场真实的旅行。让我们从头说起。1949年1月20日，关野吉晴出生在东京都墨田区，那是一个下町的老街区，充满了庶民的烟火气。他的父亲是小学老师，家境普通，没有什么特别富裕的背景，但从小他就是一个停不下来的孩子，父母非常保护他。他说从小要去山里就被说危险不准去，要去打工就被说别做多余的事，所以他心里暗自发誓，等到进了大学，一定要做自己真正想做的事。后来他做到了，而且比任何人想象的还要彻底。1967年，他考进了一桥大学法律系，这是日本顶尖的社会科学大学，一般人进去都是准备走法律或商业路线，但关野完全不是这样的人。进大学第一件事，他发现学校根本没有探险部，怎么办？那就自己创一个。他就这样成立了一桥大学探险部。对，他创部了，然后去早稻田大学的探险部旁听，学登山技术，学野外生存，把自己的身体和意志都锻炼起来。然后发生了一件事，让他的人生从此完全不同。当时早稻田大学的探险部正在筹划去尼罗河探险，关野心想，既然你们去尼罗河，那我们就去亚马逊河。他后来说，人生很多重大的决定就是这样开始的，并不是深思熟虑的结果，只是一个念头，但那个念头改变了一切。1971年，大学3年级，他申请休学1年，带着3个人组成小队，出发了。那一年他22岁，第一次出国，目的地是亚马逊，世界上最神秘的热带雨林。他们从秘鲁出发，沿着亚马逊河从源头一路漂流而下，穿越了整条河。3个人最后分头行动，各自探索不同的支流，再回到日本各自报告。这段旅程彻底改变了他，但不是用你以为的方式。他在丛林里遇到了很多原住民部落，这些人收留了他，喂他饭吃，给他住的地方，把他当朋友。对一个突然闯入的异乡人，他们毫无保留地分享了一切。然后他有一天突然意识到，他能为这些人做什么？他什么都不会，他带不了任何东西给他们，他只是一个麻烦，一个需要被照顾的外来者。这个念头让他非常难受。他说他当时觉得非常惭愧，这些人那么穷，却愿意跟他分享食物，而他只是一个手无寸铁的大学生，什么忙也帮不上。回到日本之后，他没有直接去找工作，他继续念书。法律系他读了7年，留级、休学、转系。他后来又转到一桥大学社会学系3年级，修了社会人类学的课程，想要理解他在旅途中遇到的那些人。但这些还不够，他想明白了一件事，他要去学医。如果他是一个医师，他就可以真正帮助那些人。在最偏远的地方，他可以成为一个有用的人，而不只是一个被帮助的人。这个想法对一般人来说简直不可思议。一桥大学法律系7年的学历，还要重新去考大学。但关野吉晴就是这样一个人，想清楚了就去做，不管代价是什么。1976年，他重新考大学，进入横滨市立大学医学院。6年后，1982年，他拿到了医师执照，成为一名外科医师。从18岁到33岁，他在大学里度过了整整15年。一桥大学加上医学院，有人问他这段时间的钱怎么来，他说他从高中毕业就再也没有向父母要过钱， 靠奖学金，靠各种打工，家庭教师、码头工人、体力劳动，什么都做过。医学院的时候，他想出了一个更聪明的办法。他在南美洲进货，把羊驼毛皮地毯带回日本来卖，1块4万元日币买进，7万元卖出。他告诉买家这是他的探险资金，很多人为了支持他而买单，前后卖了100块。他还卖过牛皮，1万元买进，2万元卖出，同样卖了100块。他就是这种人，目标清楚了，办法自然就来。成为外科医师之后，他在武藏野红十字医院等地方工作，但他从来没有停止去南美。医院做2-3年，再去南美几个月，回来继续做，就这样循环了将近20年。在医学院读书的时候，他每年有1/3的时间在南美。取得医师资格之后，他继续这样生活，用医院的收入支撑探险的费用。2个身份在他身上并行不悖。在这段期间，他探索了南美洲很多地方。1978年，他第一次到达圭亚那高地，那是委内瑞拉和巴西边境的神秘高原，平顶山峦耸立在云雾之中，大自然的磅礴让人觉得自己渺小，是地球上最接近原始样貌的地方之一。1981年，他在秘鲁亚马逊源流地区的潘恰科亚发现了安第斯文明的遗址，这个发现让他在探险界声名大噪。就在他不停探索南美洲的过程中，一个念头慢慢在他心里成型。他开始思考一个更大的问题：人类最早出现在非洲，就是现在的坦尚尼亚这带，大约700万年前，猿人和黑猩猩的共同祖先在这里分道扬镳。到了大约10万年前，现代智人出现了，体型和我们现在几乎一样，大脑的构造和我们相同。然后这些智人开始移动，越过撒哈拉，穿过中东，进入欧亚大陆，一路向东，越过白令海峡。那个时候海平面比现在低，白令海峡其实是一片广大的陆地。踏上北美大陆，继续南下，穿过中美洲，到达南美洲，最后抵达南美洲最南端，一个叫做火地岛的地方。这段旅程大约53000公里，需要数万年。后来英国考古学者布莱恩·费根把这段人类扩散的壮丽历程命名为伟大的旅程。关野吉晴在思考的就是这件事，如果祖先走过这条路，那我能不能也走一遍？但是反过来走，从南美洲最南端出发，一路往回走，走到非洲，走到人类诞生的地方，而且不能用现代的交通工具，只能靠自己的脚和手，就像祖先一样。这个念头听起来很疯狂，但关野吉晴是认真的。1993年，他44岁，出发了。起点是南美洲最南端的纳瓦里诺岛，那是一个在麦哲伦海峡以南的小岛，几乎是地球上最荒凉的地方之一，常年狂风，几乎没有人居住。他从那里划着独木舟出发，沿着巴塔哥尼亚海岸前行，那是终年狂风大浪的地带，海浪拍打着岩石，风刮得让人睁不开眼。他的独木舟几次几乎被浪打翻，这只是开始。他的旅程计划是这样的：从纳瓦里诺岛往北滑，穿越智利和阿根廷的巴塔哥尼亚，翻越安第斯山脉，穿越亚马逊雨林，走过中美洲，进入北美洲，穿越阿拉斯加，越过白令海峡，进入西伯利亚，横越欧亚大陆，最后抵达坦尚尼亚的莱托利，那是人类最古老的足迹化石被发现的地方。移动方式包括划独木舟、骑马、驾狗拉雪橇、骑骆驼、骑驯鹿，以及最基本的用脚走路。没有飞机，没有汽车，没有任何现代动力机械。出发的时候，他甚至没有足够的旅费，6个月后资金就用完了，他不得不回到日本工作，赚够了钱再回去继续，就这样分段进行。后来富士电视台的人看到他的旅程记录，决定把它拍成纪录片，于是一边旅行一边拍摄。在日本播出之后引发了巨大的回响， 整个旅程可以分成几个令人难忘的篇章。第一个篇章是南美洲巴塔哥尼亚的大草原上，一望无际的天空和草地。他遇见了骑马的牧人，一起在夜晚的草原上喝酒聊天，语言不通，但是欢笑相同。越过安第斯山脉的时候，他走过的是海拔4-5千公尺的高山路，高山症让他头痛欲裂，没走几步就要停下来大口喘气。但他没有停，在安第斯山区，他住在印加后裔的小村庄里，那些人守护着几百年前祖先留下来的农业技术，用最古老的方式种植马铃薯和玉米。关也在那里学到了很多东西。在亚马逊丛林里，他再一次遇到了原住民族群，这次不一样了，他带着药包，他是一个医师了，他可以帮助他们了，这让他感到一种深沉的满足。第二个篇章是北美洲和白令海峡，在阿拉斯加，他学会了驾驶狗拉雪橇，在冰天雪地里，零下几十度，跟着哈士奇在雪原上飞驰。他说那种感觉是一生中最自由的时刻之一。白令海峡的穿越是整个旅程最关键的节点之一，那条海峡分隔了美洲大陆和亚洲大陆。他乘坐因纽特人传统的皮质小艇穿越了它。这个动作在象征意义上逆转了人类从亚洲进入美洲的那一刻。第三个篇章是西伯利亚和中亚。进入西伯利亚之后，他在零下40-50度的严寒中前行，骑着驯鹿，住在雅库特族游牧民族的帐篷里，学习他们在极寒环境中生存的智慧。穿越蒙古高原的那段旅程让他深深着迷。他骑着马在大草原上奔驰，眼前是一望无际的天空和草地。他说他突然理解了，为什么游牧民族的心胸那么开阔，因为他们每天看的就是这片天地。第四个篇章是中东和非洲。穿越中东的时候，他骑骆驼穿越了沙漠，在最干燥最荒凉的地方，他遇到的贝都因族人招待他喝茶。在沙漠里，一杯热茶是最珍贵的礼物。最后2002年2月10日，他抵达了坦尚尼亚的莱托利，那是科学家在1978年发现的地点。376万年前，两个人类祖先在刚凝固的火山灰上留下了脚印，那些脚印被保存到了今天，成为人类最古老的行走记录。关野吉晴在那片红土地上停下脚步，距离出发已经过了整整10年，行程超过53000公里。他说他没有感到特别的激动，只有一种非常平静的感受，就好像完成了一件本来就应该做的事。他终于回到了人类最初的家。回到日本之后，他被问到最多的问题是，这段旅程最大的收获是什么？他的回答总是让人出乎意料。他说他最大的发现，不是地理上的发现，不是人类学上的发现，而是对人性的发现。他走过的每一个地方，都有人帮助他，不管是亚马逊的原住民，还是阿拉斯加的因纽特人，还是蒙古的游牧民，还是非洲的农夫。这些人很多自己都很贫穷，有些人甚至从来没有见过像他这样的外来者，但是他们都选择了帮助他。没有人问他是谁，没有人问他能给什么回报，他们只是看到一个需要帮助的人，然后伸出了手。这让他相信，帮助有需要的人，这是人类共通的本性，不分文化，不分语言，不分时代。他后来把这个想法提炼成一句话：困难的人相互依赖，才是真正的连结，不是礼貌性的点头，不是表面的客气，而是真正的互相依赖，真正的彼此麻烦。伟大的旅程完成之后，关野吉晴没有停下来。2004年，他又出发了。这次的问题是，日本人是怎么来到日本列岛的？人类学研究显示，日本人的祖先大约从3个方向来到日本。北方从西伯利亚越过库页岛或北海道，中间路线从喜马拉雅经印度支那半岛到朝鲜半岛再渡海，以及海上路线从印尼的苏拉威西岛出发，越过太平洋到达冲绳。关野吉晴决定把这3条路都走一遍，他把这个计划叫做新伟大的旅程。 北方路线他从西伯利亚一路往北，经过库页岛到达日本北端地质内。中间路线他从喜马拉雅山下山，穿越东南亚各国，经朝鲜半岛渡海到对马。最后是海上路线，这是最艰难的一段，也是最让他骄傲的一段。他和武藏野美术大学的学生们一起，用传统的工法手工建造了2艘木舟，一艘用绳纹时代的技术制作。他们找了一棵大树，用石质的斧头把它砍下来，然后一刀一刀的把木头挖空，做成独木舟。这艘船叫做绳纹号。另一艘用苏拉威西岛马达尔族的传统造船技术制作，那是一种非常精细的手工帆船，叫做巴库尔号。没有玻璃纤维，没有现代材料，全部都是天然素材，光是制作石斧就花了好几个月。然后他们从苏拉威西岛出发，在没有引擎的情况下，只靠风力和人力划桨，在茫茫大海上航行。这段旅程中，他们遭遇了大风大浪，几次几乎翻船，船上的人必须轮流值班划桨，一天24小时都有人在操控船只。几个月后，2011年6月13日，他们抵达了冲绳的石垣岛。从1993年的出发算起，整个旅程共历时18年。关野吉晴回答了他的问题，用他的身体，用他的时间，用他的人生。完成旅程之后，他在武藏野美术大学担任文化人类学教授，直到2019年退休。他的课堂很不一样，他让学生们从最基本的事情开始做起。他认为现代人已经失去了太多基本的能力，我们不知道食物怎么来，不知道衣服怎么做，不知道工具怎么制作，我们只知道如何购买。所以他的课让学生从头开始，怎么生活，怎么做陶器，怎么打石器，怎么种植粮食，最后怎么从头开始做一道咖喱饭，从种米、种香料、养鸡，到最后把一切都煮成一盘咖喱，全部自己来。学生一开始连罐头的拉环都打不开，后来可以用砍刀开罐头。这门课后来被拍成纪录片，题目就叫做从头开始做咖喱饭。他说他想要让学生理解我们现代人有多依赖他人，我们的每一餐背后都有无数人的劳动，每一件衣服，每一个工具，都来自远方看不见的人的努力。如果我们能理解这一点，我们就不会那么轻易的与人疏离，我们就会记得，我们是靠着彼此才活下去的。退休之后的关野吉晴没有停止思考，他开始关注更大的问题。人类能够在这颗星球上永久生存吗？我们现在的生活方式能够持续吗？我们消耗的资源，我们破坏的生态，这些代价是谁在承担？他把这个思考方向叫做地球永驻计划。怎么让人类能够永远住在这颗星球上，不破坏生态系统，不耗尽资源，与所有生命共存。2024年，75岁的他完成了一部新的纪录片，片名叫做《粪便与死体的父权》。听起来非常冲击，但核心是非常重要的生态问题。他说我们把粪便和死亡都藏起来了，视为肮脏的东西，把它们从生活中隔离开来，但其实它们是生态循环不可或缺的一部分。粪便是肥料，死亡是新生的起点。如果我们继续把这些东西当作废弃物来处理，我们只是在加速破坏自然的循环。他用这部纪录片问了一个尖锐的问题：现代文明的进步到底让我们得到了什么，又让我们失去了什么？关野吉晴的故事让我想到一件事：现代社会我们都在说效率，说便利，说独立自主，我们越来越不需要别人了。一个人可以订外卖，一个人可以网购，一个人可以在家工作，一个人可以不需要任何人。但这样真的好吗？关野走过那5万公里，他每一步都需要别人，每一个让他吃饭的陌生人，每一个教他技术的当地人，每一个在暴风雪中给他方向的向导。因为需要别人，所以他与所有人连结在一起，这才是人类本来的样子。他做过一个演讲，说他在旅途中学到的最重要的事， 是人类的善良，不是某一个民族的善良，不是某一个宗教的善良，是人类作为一个物种的善良。他说无论走到哪里，他都遇到了愿意帮助陌生人的人。这件事让他对人类充满了信心。他相信我们还有机会，只要我们记得，我们是同一个家族。700万年前的那个共同祖先，在东非的某个地方，抬头看着天空，不知道他的后代有一天会遍布全球，不知道我们其中会有人跑去问，我们究竟从哪里来的？而关野吉晴用自己的双脚回答了这个问题，不是用嘴巴说的，不是用键盘打的，是用身体一步一步走出来的答案。今天的沉思者 J 就到这里。关野吉晴的故事让我觉得，我们每个人的心里都有一个大问题在等着被回答，也许不是5万公里那么远，但那个问题值得你用行动去回应。不管是什么样的旅程，走出去就对了。感谢你们今天的陪伴，我们下次见咯。Hello everyone, I'm Jenny. Welcome to Thinker J. Today I want to introduce you to someone who spent his entire life answering one question. It is a question so large that most people never even think to ask it. And it is a question so fundamental that the answer belongs to every single person on Earth. Where do we humans actually come from? Not in a spiritual sense. Not in a philosophical sense. In a real, physical, geographical sense. How did we get here? How did people end up in every corner of this planet? Most of us accept this question as something for scientists to answer. Something to read about in a book or watch in a documentary. But the person we are talking about today decided that accepting other people's answers was not enough. He needed to answer it himself. With his own body. With his own feet. Over the course of his entire adult life. His name is Yoshiharu Sekino. And his story is one of the most extraordinary I have ever encountered. Let me start at the very beginning. January 20th, 1949. Yoshiharu Sekino was born in Sumida Ward, in the heart of Tokyo. This was a Shitamachi district, an old-fashioned downtown neighborhood. The kind of place where neighbors knew each other. Where children played in the streets. Where the pace of life felt close to the ground. His father taught elementary school. The family was ordinary. Modest in means. Nothing about Sekino's upbringing would suggest what was coming. Except for one thing. He could never sit still. He was always the child who wanted to go somewhere. Who needed to find out what was on the other side of the hill. His parents, worried about safety in the way parents always are, tried to hold him back. He said later that if he wanted to hike in the mountains, he was told it was too dangerous. If he wanted to take a part-time job, he was told not to do unnecessary things. His parents meant well. But all of their caution had one effect he could not have predicted. It made him more determined than ever. He made a private promise to himself. Once he got to university, he would do exactly what he truly wanted. He would hold nothing back. He kept that promise. More thoroughly and more completely than anyone around him could have imagined. In 1967, he was accepted into Hitotsubashi University. This is one of Japan's most distinguished institutions for social sciences. The kind of place where serious young people go to become lawyers, economists, and government officials. Exactly the kind of environment you would expect to produce someone conventional and career-focused. The first thing Yoshiharu Sekino did when he arrived at Hitotsubashi University was look for the adventure club. He could not find one. Because there was not one. So he created one himself. He founded the Hitotsubashi University Adventure Club from nothing. He then went and attended training sessions with the Adventure Club at Waseda University, one of Japan's most famous schools. He learned mountaineering. He studied wilderness survival. He trained his body until it could do things most people would never attempt. And then came the moment that redirected the rest of his life. He heard that the Adventure Club at Waseda University was planning an expedition to the Nile River. This was the kind of information that triggered something inside Sekino. Not admiration. A challenge. If they were going to the Nile, then he was going to the Amazon. He later reflected that many of the decisions that shaped his life began exactly like that. Not from elaborate planning. Not from years of careful research. Just a thought. A thought that arrived and would not leave. In 1971, Sekino was in his third year of university. He was 22 years old. He took a year off from his studies. He assembled a small team of 3 people. And they left for South America. It was his first time leaving Japan. His destination was the Amazon. The largest river system on Earth, the most species-rich tropical rainforest in the world. A place that had captivated the imagination of explorers, scientists, and dreamers for centuries. They began in Peru. They navigated the Amazon from its headwaters all the way to the sea. The three of them eventually split up to explore different tributaries independently. Months passed. Each of them traveled their own piece of the river. They reunited only when they returned to Japan. What Sekino encountered during that year stayed with him forever. Deep in the jungle, far from any city or road, he came across indigenous communities. These were people who had lived in the same forests for generations. People whose entire lives were organized around knowledge of the natural world. They welcomed him without hesitation. A young Japanese man who appeared out of nowhere. A complete stranger who could not speak a word of their language. They fed him. They gave him shelter. They included him in their daily life. They treated him like a member of their community. And then one day, somewhere along the river, it hit him. What could he offer them? What had he actually brought to this encounter? Nothing. He had no skills they needed. He had no knowledge that could help them. He had arrived with his hands empty. And every day these people shared what little they had with him. He said later that he felt a deep and genuine shame. Not the temporary embarrassment of a social mistake. A real, persistent sense of having taken without giving. These people were not wealthy. Many of them lived in genuine material hardship. And yet they offered a stranger everything they could. While he, a young man from one of the world's most technologically advanced countries, could offer nothing in return. He carried that feeling home with him. Back in Japan, he did not simply settle into a career. He spent several more years at Hitotsubashi University, eventually completing his law degree after 7 years. He also audited courses in social anthropology, trying to build a framework for understanding the people he had met. But intellectual understanding was not what he was after. He wanted something more direct, more useful, more honest. Eventually, the answer came to him. He would become a doctor. This was the logic. A physician could go anywhere. A physician had something real to offer. In the most remote places on Earth, medical knowledge was not just useful. It was genuinely precious. If he trained as a doctor, he would never again arrive at a remote community with empty hands. To most people who knew him, this idea was astonishing. He had already spent 7 years at a prestigious university studying law. He was in his late 20s. The idea of starting from scratch and sitting university entrance exams again would have seemed absurd to almost anyone. But Yoshiharu Sekino was not almost anyone. In 1976, he sat the medical school entrance exams. He was accepted into Yokohama City University School of Medicine. For the next 6 years, he studied medicine. And he continued going to South America the entire time. Even during medical school, he spent roughly 4 months of every year in the Amazon. He was always 2 things at once. Always on 2 tracks simultaneously. How did he pay for all of this? He had no family money. From the day he graduated from high school, he never asked his parents for a single yen. He supported himself through scholarships. He worked every kind of part-time job he could find. Tutoring students. Laboring at the docks. Physical work of all kinds. When he needed to fund his Amazon journeys during medical school, he came up with a more creative solution. He started a small import business. He traveled to South America, bought alpaca wool rugs directly from producers, and sold them in Japan. He would buy a rug for 40,000 yen and sell it for 70,000. He told his customers honestly that the money was going toward his expeditions. Many people, touched by this, were happy to buy. He sold 100 rugs this way. He applied the same logic to cowhide, buying at 10,000 yen and selling at 20,000. Another 100 pieces sold. He was resourceful in the truest sense of the word. Not in the sense of making do with less. In the sense of finding a way when no obvious way existed. In 1982, at age 33, Yoshiharu Sekino received his medical license. He became a surgeon. He began working at hospitals including Musashino Red Cross Hospital. And the rhythm of his life became something that most people would find difficult to imagine. 2 or 3 years at a hospital. Then several months in South America. Then back to the hospital. Then back to South America. Year after year. For nearly 20 years. The medical work funded the explorations. The explorations gave the medical work meaning. Neither one diminished the other. During this long period he went deeper and deeper into South America. In 1978, he made his first visit to the Guiana Highlands. This is a geological wonder straddling Venezuela and Brazil. Enormous flat-topped mountains, called tepuis, rise abruptly from the jungle like islands in the sky. The landscape looks like something from the deep past of the Earth. In some ways it is. The rock formations are among the oldest on the surface of the planet. Standing there, you feel the weight of time in a way that is hard to describe. In 1981, in the source region of the Amazon River in Peru, he discovered ruins of an Andean civilization. This find brought him recognition in the exploration community. But it was not the discovery itself that mattered to him most. It was what the discovery pointed to. The idea that people had been moving through these landscapes, building things, leaving traces, for thousands of years before anyone from the outside world arrived. This idea kept growing inside him. It connected to something bigger. He began thinking about the largest possible version of the question he had been circling for years. Not just where these people came from, but where all of us came from. Human beings first appeared in Africa, in what is now Tanzania and nearby regions. The evidence places the emergence of our earliest ancestors there, roughly 7 million years ago. That was when the lineage that would become us first diverged from the lineage that would become chimpanzees. Then, approximately 100,000 years ago, anatomically modern humans appeared. People who looked essentially like us. Whose brains were essentially like ours. And then something remarkable happened. These people began to move. They did not stay in Africa. They did not decide the continent was enough. For reasons that scientists are still debating, they began to spread. Out of Africa and into the Middle East. From the Middle East into Europe and Asia. Across the Eurasian landmass in waves over tens of thousands of years. Pressing always further. Following the animals. Following the seasons. Following something in their nature that said, keep moving, see what is beyond the next horizon. At that time, sea levels were much lower than they are today. The area we now call the Bering Strait was not a strait at all. It was a broad land bridge, sometimes called Beringia, connecting what is now Siberia to what is now Alaska. People walked across it. They entered the Americas. They pressed southward through North America, through Central America, into South America, further and further south, until, perhaps 15,000 years ago, they reached the very tip of the continent. A windswept, frozen archipelago at the bottom of the world. The entire journey, from the African plains to the southern tip of South America, covered roughly 53,000 kilometers. Tens of thousands of years. Countless generations. Each one living and dying along the way. Each one passing something forward to the next. A British archaeologist named Brian Fagan gave this great migration a name. He called it the Great Journey. Yoshiharu Sekino read about this. And he had a thought that would not leave him alone. If my ancestors walked this path, if they covered 53,000 kilometers over tens of thousands of years, what would it be like to retrace that journey? Not forward, but in reverse. Starting at the end point. Walking all the way back to the beginning. And doing it the way they did it. Without engines. Without modern transportation. With only the power of his own body. He was 44 years old when he finally decided to stop thinking about it and start doing it. In 1993, he set out. His starting point was Navarino Island. This is one of the southernmost inhabited places on the planet. A remote island below the Strait of Magellan, at the very tip of South America. Winds batter it almost constantly. The landscape is raw and elemental. It is the kind of place that reminds you just how much of the earth remains indifferent to human presence. From Navarino Island, Sekino set off in a kayak, paddling northward along the Patagonian coast. This is one of the most dangerous coastlines in the world for small craft. Storms roll in without warning. The currents are powerful and unpredictable. His kayak was nearly capsized multiple times in the opening weeks alone. That was just the beginning of the first chapter. His route from there would take him northward through Patagonia, across the Andes Mountains, through the Amazon rainforest, up through Central America, into North America, across Alaska, over the Bering Strait, through Siberia, across Central Asia, through the Middle East, and finally into Africa. His methods of travel included kayaking ocean and river water, riding horses across grasslands and mountain trails, driving dog sleds across Arctic snow, riding camels through desert terrain, riding reindeer through the Siberian wilderness, and walking on foot across everything in between. No airplanes. No automobiles. No engines of any kind. When he departed, he did not even have enough money to complete the journey. 6 months into the expedition, he had run out of funds. He returned to Japan, worked as a surgeon to replenish his finances, then flew back to exactly the spot where he had stopped and resumed. He did this multiple times over the course of the 10 years. The journey was completed in stages, always picking up exactly where he had left off. Then Fuji Television became interested. They began documenting his journey and broadcasting it as a documentary series in Japan. The response was enormous. Millions of people followed along. Something about a person crossing the world on foot, retracing the ancient migration of humanity, resonated with people in a way that was hard to explain but impossible to ignore. Let me walk you through some of the most remarkable episodes along the way. In Patagonia, on the vast open grasslands that stretched to the horizon in every direction, he encountered gauchos. These are the horsemen of the South American plains. They spend their lives in the saddle, moving cattle across the land, living by the rhythms of the seasons. Sekino rode with them. He shared food and drink under enormous night skies. Neither side spoke the other's language. But the laughter needed no translation. And the generosity needed no explanation. Crossing the Andes mountain range meant traveling at altitudes of 4,000 or 5,000 meters above sea level. The oxygen at those heights is thin. Altitude sickness brought pounding headaches and breathlessness. Every few steps he had to stop and recover. His pace slowed to something that felt almost stationary. But he did not turn back. In Andean villages, he stayed with communities that were direct descendants of the Inca civilization. These people had maintained agricultural techniques developed by their ancestors centuries before the Spanish arrived. They grew potatoes and corn by methods unchanged for generations. They shared their knowledge with him freely. He learned things there that no textbook could have taught him. In the Amazon basin, he encountered indigenous communities again. But this time was completely different from his first visit 20 years earlier. This time he carried a medical kit. He was a physician. He could actually do something for these people. He treated injuries. He addressed medical problems that had gone unattended for months or years in communities with no access to healthcare. The sense of being genuinely useful, of having something real to offer after all those years of arriving empty-handed, was one of the most powerful feelings of his entire journey. In Alaska, he learned to drive a dog sled. A team of huskies pulling him across the frozen tundra. Temperatures dropping to -30, -40 degrees Celsius. A landscape of white in every direction. He said it was one of the most purely free moments of his entire life. The cold so intense it hurt to breathe. The silence so complete you could hear your own heartbeat. And the dogs running as if they had been born for exactly this. The crossing of the Bering Strait was one of the most symbolically charged moments of the entire journey. He crossed it in a traditional Inuit skin boat. The boat was made of seal skin stretched over a wooden frame. It was the same design that indigenous peoples had used for thousands of years. That passage across the water, moving from the American continent to the Asian continent, was a reversal of the ancient migration. He was literally traveling backward through the history of humanity. From the New World back to the Old. In Siberia, he rode reindeer. He lived with Yakut nomadic peoples in their traditional felt tents. He experienced temperatures of -40 and -50 degrees Celsius. These are temperatures at which exposed skin freezes within minutes. At which the moisture in your breath turns to ice before it leaves your face. The Yakut people had adapted to these conditions over countless generations. They knew how to build shelter. They knew how to find food. They knew how to care for the animals that sustained them. He absorbed every piece of knowledge they were willing to share. Crossing the Mongolian steppe on horseback was one of the experiences that stayed with him most deeply after the journey was finished. He said that riding across that landscape, with the sky and the grassland extending in every direction without limit, gave him a feeling he had never had before. A feeling of being small, but not in a frightening way. Small in a way that felt right. Like the correct proportion between a person and the world. He said he understood in that moment why people who live in such landscapes tend to have such open hearts. Because what they look at every day is boundless. When your horizon is that wide, your thinking tends to match it. Across Central Asia, through the Middle East, into the desert regions. In the Sahara and the Arabian Peninsula, he rode camels. He encountered Bedouin communities. These are nomadic peoples who have crossed the same desert routes for millennia. In the middle of one of the driest landscapes on Earth, a Bedouin family invited him to sit with them and share tea. He said that cup of hot tea, offered freely in the most inhospitable environment imaginable, was one of the most meaningful gifts he had ever received. And finally, on February 10, 2002, he arrived at Litoli, in Tanzania. This is a place in the East African Rift Valley. In 1978, the paleontologist Mary Leakey discovered something extraordinary here. Preserved in a layer of volcanic ash that had solidified 3.76 million years ago. A series of footprints. Left by two early hominids walking upright across the freshly fallen ash. Side by side. Step by step. the oldest physical evidence of human ancestors walking on 2 feet. Yoshiharu Sekino stood at that spot. 10 years had passed since he left Navarino Island. He had traveled over 53,000 kilometers. He did not feel triumphant. He did not feel proud. He said he felt quiet, still, as if something that had been unsettled inside him for a very long time had finally come to rest. He had come back to the place where it all started. He had made the complete circle. He had traveled from the end all the way back to the beginning. In the years after he returned to Japan, the question he was asked most often was this: what did you discover? What was the most important thing you found? His answer consistently surprised people. He did not talk about geography. He did not talk about human evolution or ancient migrations. He talked about people. He said that the most important thing he discovered on his 10-year journey was the goodness of human beings. Not the goodness of one particular culture or nation. The goodness of humans as a species. Everywhere he went, people helped him. The indigenous communities of the Amazon. The Gauchos of Patagonia. The Inuit of Alaska. The nomads of Mongolia. The Bedouin of the Arabian Desert. The farmers of East Africa. Many of these people were poor by any material standard. Some had never seen anyone who looked like him. Some lived in conditions that most of the world would consider extremely difficult. And yet, when a stranger appeared and needed help, they helped. No negotiation. No demand for payment. No hesitation. Just, here is food. Here is a place to sleep. Here is how to get where you are going. Sekino said this experience fundamentally changed how he sees humanity. He had set out asking a question about the past. About where we came from. But what the journey actually taught him was something about the present. About who we still are. He developed an idea from this that he has expressed in many forms. The people you can truly burden. The people who will truly accept your helplessness and offer what they have without calculating the return. Those are the people you are actually connected to. Real connection is not politeness. It is not social performance. It is mutual dependence. It is the willingness to be genuinely needed and genuinely needy. After completing the great journey, Sekino did not retire to write his memoirs and give lectures. He started again. In 2004, he launched a new project. He called it the New Great Journey. The question this time was, how did people come to the Japanese archipelago? Modern anthropology suggests 3 main routes. A northern route across Siberia and the island of Sakhalin into Hokkaido. A middle route descending from the Himalayas through Southeast Asia and the Korean Peninsula. And a southern maritime route, departing from Sulawesi Island in Indonesia and sailing north through the islands to reach Okinawa. Sekino decided to travel all 3 routes himself. The northern route took him from the depths of Siberia all the way to Wakkanai, Japan's northernmost city. The middle route descended from the Himalayan highlands through Southeast Asian nations before crossing to the Korean Peninsula and then to Tsushima Island off the coast of Japan. But the maritime route was the most audacious of all. Sekino and his students at Musashino Art University decided to build the boats themselves. From scratch. Using only traditional materials and traditional methods. One boat was built using techniques from the Jomon period, the prehistoric era of Japanese civilization. They found a large tree. They felled it using stone axes. Not modern steel axes. Stone axes. The kind of tool a person living 10,000 years ago would have made and used. Then they chipped and carved away at the wood by hand, stroke by stroke, over months of painstaking labor, until they had hollowed it into a seaworthy vessel. They named this boat Jomongo. The second boat was built using the traditional boat-building techniques of the Mundar people of Sulawesi Island in Indonesia. The Mundar are renowned for their expertise in building and sailing traditional wooden vessels. Students worked alongside Mundar craftspeople to construct this boat. They named it Pakurgo. When Sekino says these boats were built from natural materials, he means completely natural materials. Not modern natural materials. Ancient ones. The process of making the stone axes alone took several months. Every part of every boat was made by hand, from raw materials, by the people who would then sail them. In 2009, they set sail from Sulawesi Island. No engine. No GPS navigation. No safety net of modern technology. Just 2 wooden boats, handmade sails, paddles, and the Pacific Ocean. The journey covered 4,700 kilometers. The crew faced storms. They faced navigation challenges. They faced mechanical problems with the boats themselves. They took turns on watch around the clock. Always someone at the oars, always someone scanning the horizon. On June 13, 2011, they arrived at Ishigaki Island in Okinawa. The full new Great Journey had taken 7 years. Combined with the original Great Journey, the entire project had spanned 18 years. Yoshiharu Sekino had answered his questions. Both of them. Where do humans come from? How did people come to Japan? Answered with his body. 1 kilometer at a time. After retiring from exploration, he became a professor of cultural anthropology at Musashino Art University. He taught there from 2002 until 2019. His classroom was not a conventional one. He had a core belief that modern people had lost something important. Not intelligence. Not capability. But a certain kind of grounded understanding. We do not know where our food comes from. Not really. We know it comes from a store. But most of us have never grown a plant, raised an animal, or watched the full process of food going from living thing to meal. We do not know how our clothing is made. We do not know how our tools are constructed. We have outsourced all of this understanding to other people, to systems, to supply chains we never think about. And in doing so, Sekino believed, we have lost the felt sense of how much we depend on each other. So he designed a course to restore that felt sense. He had his students start from nothing. How to make fire without matches. How to shape clay into pottery. How to nap a sharp edge from a piece of stone. How to plant, cultivate, and harvest food. And then the culminating project. Make a full curry from absolute scratch. Not from ingredients bought at a supermarket. From the earth. Grow the rice. Cultivate the spices. Raise the chicken. Make every single component with your own hands. And then cook it all together into a meal. Students who arrived not knowing how to open a tin can without a mechanical can opener. Left knowing how to open one with a machete. And more importantly, left with a different sense of what it means to eat. To wear clothing. To use a tool. This class was eventually documented in a film titled Making Curry Rice from Scratch. It became widely discussed in Japan. Because what it showed was not just students learning skills. It showed the transformation in how they understood their relationship to the world. Their relationship to other people. Their sense of what it means to be alive and dependent on countless other living things. This is what Sekino has been pointing at his entire life. Through his expeditions. Through his medicine. Through his teaching. The same insight expressed in different forms. We are not self-sufficient. We never were. From the very first moment humans walked out of Africa, they survived by depending on each other. By sharing food. By sharing knowledge. By helping strangers who became, through the act of helping, a little less strange. In his later years, Sekino has turned his attention to what he calls the Earth Habitation Plan. A question even larger than where we came from. Can we stay? The question is whether human civilization as it currently operates is compatible with long-term survival on this planet. Whether the resources we consume, the ecosystems we damage, the carbon we produce, are leading us toward a future we can actually inhabit. In 2024, at 75 years old, he completed a documentary film. The title, translated roughly, is Restoring the Rights of Excrement and Corpses. It sounds confrontational. It is meant to be. He argues that modern civilization has made a mistake in how it relates to the cycles of life and death. We have hidden excrement from view. We have hidden death from view. We process them industrially, mechanically, in ways that sever them from the natural systems they belong to. But excrement is fertilizer. Death is the beginning of new growth. Every ecosystem depends on these processes. When we remove them from the cycle, we weaken the very systems that sustain us. He made a film about this at 75 years old. Because at 75 he is still asking questions. Still following thoughts that arrive and will not leave him alone. Still acting on what he finds. The story of Yoshiharu Sekino makes me think about the nature of a question. Most questions stay questions. We think about them. We read about them. We discuss them. We go to bed still wondering. Sekino took a question and turned it into a journey. He answered it the only way he believed it could truly be answered. Not with words. Not with theories. With his body. With his time. With the actual texture of walking across mountains and paddling across oceans. And what he came back with was not data. It was a feeling. A conviction. Something he knew in his bones. We are all the same. We all came from the same place. We all need each other. We are all still capable of helping a stranger. That is what the Great Journey taught him. In a world that increasingly tells us we can get by without other people. In a world of efficiency and independence and optimization. The man who retraced the ancient migration of humanity came back and said, "No, you cannot get by without other people. You never could. And the sooner you remember that, the better." Let me add one more dimension to his story that I think deserves its own moment. Throughout everything he did, Yoshiharu Sekino maintained a double life. Not in a secretive sense, but in the sense of genuinely being two things at once. He was always both an explorer and a physician. And the combination was not incidental. It was essential to who he was. He said once that he never wanted to be a researcher who studied the people he encountered. He never wanted them to be his subjects. He wanted them to be his friends. The difference between a researcher and a friend is subtle but profound. A researcher takes. A friend exchanges. A researcher observes. A friend participates. Being a physician allowed him to show up in remote communities as someone with something to offer. Someone who could join the exchange. Not just receive. This is a deeply human way of thinking about knowledge. Most of us learn about the world by reading about it. By watching documentaries. By listening to lectures from people who have been there. We accumulate second-hand understanding. And there is nothing wrong with that. It is how most learning works. But Sekino believed there was a different kind of knowing. A knowing that only comes from doing. From placing your body in a situation and letting it teach you. From being cold in Siberia, not reading about Siberian cold. From being hungry in the desert, not reading about desert hunger. From being helped by strangers, not reading about human generosity. This is why his journeys were journeys and not expeditions in the conventional sense. A conventional expedition has a goal. Reach the summit. Complete the route. Achieve the objective. Sekino had goals too, of course. But what he was actually doing was something closer to learning. Using his body as an instrument of understanding. And what he learned, over 50 years of travel and medicine and teaching, is this. The most important things about being human cannot be understood at a distance. They can only be felt. The cold. The hunger. The gratitude. The relief of being helped. The satisfaction of helping. The connection that forms between two people when one is genuinely needed and the other genuinely helps. These things are not abstractions. They are experiences. And Yoshiharu Sekino chose to have them. As many as possible. For as long as he could. He is still going. Still asking. Still following the thoughts that will not leave him alone. At 75, some people his age are looking back. Reviewing their lives. Assessing what they built and what they left behind. Sekino seems to be doing something different. He seems to be still looking forward. Still wondering what is on the other side of the next question. There is something in that which feels like a lesson. Not a lesson about exploration. Not a lesson about medicine or anthropology. A lesson about what it means to stay alive in the fullest sense of the word. To remain curious. To remain willing to go where your questions lead you. To trust that the answer, whatever it turns out to be, will be worth the journey. There is one more thing I want to share with you before we close today. In 1999, Yoshiharu Sekino was awarded the Uemura Naomi Adventure Prize. This is Japan's most prestigious award for explorers. It is named after Naomi Uemura, a legendary Japanese adventurer who became the first person to reach the North Pole solo and disappeared on Denali in 1984. To receive this award is to be recognized as part of a lineage of people who pushed against the limits of what a person can do alone in the natural world. But Sekino would probably be the first to say that his journey was never really about being alone. Yes, there were long stretches where he was moving through wilderness with no one beside him. Yes, the physical challenges were his alone to face. But the journey only became possible because of other people. Always other people. The Inuit who taught him how their skin boats worked. The Mongolian herder who showed him how to read the land. The Andean family who let him sleep in their home and fed him from their own modest stores. The students who built boats with him by hand. The television crew who believed his story was worth telling. The audience in Japan who followed along and somehow, through their attention, helped carry him forward. A journey of 53,000 kilometers sounds like the act of a solitary, determined individual. And in one sense it was. But in another sense, it was the act of all the people who joined it along the way. All the people who offered something at a moment when something was needed. All the people who made the next step possible. That is the real meaning of the great journey, I think. Not one person walking across the world. Humanity walking together. One conversation, one shared meal, one cup of tea at a time. Thank you for joining me today. See you next time.